Hello, this is Steve Quarles and Yana Valachovic coming to you again to talk about your deck this time. We really appreciate your taking time to listen to us talk about these various components of your home. When we're talking about your deck, it's just important, I think, to remember or to know that your deck is can be vulnerable when your home is threatened by wildfire from two different kind of mechanisms. One is that flames can burn on the ground through vegetation and reach the underside of your deck. Also, embers can reach the top side of your deck just because they're blowing through the air. So your deck needs to be able to resist wind-blown embers and flames from a surface fire that might be burning from below. We've talked about defensible space and vegetation management, on your property. That part is supposed to minimize the chance that flames can burn from below along the ground and get underneath the deck area. So assuming, though, you have done a great job there, your deck will still have to resist embers. And so we're going to be mostly focusing on the ember part of your deck during this particular presentation. We talked about this near home zone, this non-combustible zone, the 0 to 5 foot zone, whatever you want to call it. It's this area really close to your house that can make your home quite vulnerable to embers if you don't take care of this zone right next to your house, and can make your home quite resistant to embers should you do a good job there. And so we have a couple of pictures here on the left showing just this non-combustible zone in general along the side. It's just important to know and to acknowledge that this zone needs to extend under the footprint of any of your attached decks, as we see in this middle picture. This is a good example of a non-combustible zone under the deck. You really can't expect your deck to perform well if you store a lot of things underneath it, such as we see in the bottom right-hand picture. You can't really have your own personal lumberyard under your deck and expect your deck to survive so well. And the problem is that once this deck ignites, it'll easily carry the fire to your home. And there's a lot of things between your deck and your home that make it easy for fire to enter the house, because you typically want to be able to get to that deck from your house. You're going to have a sliding glass door or a door. It's going to be really close to your siding, relatively close to other window type features. So a lot of vulnerabilities should that deck ignite. So you want to do all you can to minimize the chance that your deck ignites and that it gets to be a big fire. And these things, such as storing combustibles under the deck, will facilitate that action. So,
for me, the deck is my favorite part of the house, and it's something that we ask our decks to perform. Both to be able to withstand the rain, maybe the snow, the constant elements outside. And now we just need to think a little bit more about how we can help our decks perform well relative to fire. So if you're like me and you love your deck, then just a little bit of fine tuning can make a huge difference for you in the survivability of your building to wildfire exposure.
Exactly. If you have a deck that overhangs a slope, there's some sort of additional things you need to make sure you address. And this is all in this defensible space veg management kind of camp. As we see here, there's this non-combustible retaining wall downslope of the deck. This can be something that you can use to help protect your deck from fire burning upslope and minimize the chance that flames can actually impinge on the underside of the deck. This works well if you have shrub or grass land, as we see in this left-hand picture and the right-hand picture. If you have a forested or wooded downslope area, a crown fire in those trees are going to burn over top of any retaining wall that you're going to have. So in those situations, really, it's thinning and doing things so that the fire cannot burn from the ground into the crowns or the upper parts of those trees. That would be your only strategy. But should you have shrubbery or grass, then this downslope non-combustible retaining wall is something you can consider to as an additional protective measure for your deck. When we talk about embers, when I was with IBHS, we did quite a lot of research on the vulnerability of decks to embers. That research continues to this day, even after my retirement. So we're learning a lot about decks. What we do know is that where embers tend to accumulate on your deck is in that gap between the deck boards over top of a joist. So if the embers fall into a gap where the joist isn't, then they'll fall straight through to the ground. And so this is another reason to keep combustible things out from underneath your deck, because it's going to get embers from below coming underneath the deck, and also from above, those that fall through the gap between deck boards and fall straight through onto the material below. So the ignition will occur in that area between the deck board where the joist is, and then the fire, which will be a small fire initially, will burn to the building, to your home. And then it's a function of what's on your home in terms of how vulnerable that would be. But if you have combustible siding, then it can ignite that. It can break glass in the window, things like that, or on your sliding glass door. So we want to do things that can make this accumulation less of a problem. And we'll talk about that along and along. Yeah.
Well, and so what that really speaks to, though, is this need to be aware of how your deck's conditions are overall. And, if you have potted plants on your deck and maybe they drop a lot of leaf material, be aware where that leaf material goes, and just employ kind of a regular maintenance strategy to clean out those gaps, whether that's, using something like, mechanical, or whether that's using a power washer. Just try not to damage the rest of the deck boards when you do that, because it's pretty easy to spray a little too hard and create some other issues there. But being aware of kind of what you've got, and wider spaces between those deck boards also makes it a bit easier. So if you're starting with new construction, you've got a few more options.
That's true. So new construction is easier. Existing construction, there are some things you can do. As Yana had indicated, this increasing the gap between deck boards, this is definitely a new deck kind of a thing, but that increased gap, the typical gap is 1/8 of an inch. If you can increase that to even 1/4 of an inch, that helps minimize the chance that an ignited deck boards can propagate so far. And so they might ignite, but then they'll self-extinguish before they can get to your house. You can remove deck boards. We'll show a different picture of this in the next slide, but you can remove deck boards close to your home and replace those with non-combustible options. When you're doing that, then you can, in that area at least, install this. In this case, it's a foil-faced bitumen tape product, but you can also just use aluminum flashing that you bend over top of the deck board. This basically takes this wood joist out of the picture in terms of being able to participate in the ignition of the deck. When embers accumulate in this area, it's the deck boards and the joist that result in the ignition process. If you take the joist out of it, then you only have 2 surfaces to worry about, and that tends to help. So here we have, this kind of scenario. Here's this picture where we see this homeowner took the deck boards, removed the deck boards that were really close to the house and replaced it with a metal grate. In this case, there are non-combustible deck boards that are available, so you can just replace 1 or 2 deck boards. Here we just did 1, but you could do 2, and that would allow the fire to the deck to ignite and burn to the building, but stop short of it. So it's similar to this non-combustible zone we talked about around the perimeter of the house. Here we're having a non-combustible zone between the deck and the wall. And this particular house had a metal flashing extending up the wall vertically. So that was a good feature. If you don't have that, you can see on the left-hand picture, installing metal flashing 6 inches or so up the wall. It's important that this flashing get tucked in either at a lap joint or into a kerf that is cut with a saw, so that water can't get between the flashing and in this case wood siding. You'll have rot developing if you don't take some pretty good care in this installation feature or detail. I think the point here, though, is that you are protecting the deck and the siding if you can make this area non-combustible. And this is something that is much easier to do, cheaper to do when you have an existing deck. You know, replacing one deck board, adding flashing, definitely cheaper than replacing the entire deck. This is just, again, a friend of mine that did this repair, so I got the pictures, but we're using this aluminum flashing in this case. And then this is the end result that we saw last picture, just this replacement of the near home component with this metal grating instead of a wooden deck board. So.
And did that homeowner also deal with some of the vegetation around the edge of the deck? Because that looks like, especially on the sail rails, that there could be some other issues there to keep in mind. Because the whole goal really is to make sure the deck does not ignite. You hope that your home, if you do have wildfire exposure, is protected by the professional fire services. But on the chance that they're stretched too thin and can't make it to your home that night, you want to make sure that you've taken every action to prevent ignition of the home. And the deck is one of the first ways you can get ignition.
That's a good point. This vegetation out at the foot of this deck is further away than it looks.
Okay.
We need to talk about this one. You're right. There you go. Let's see. So there's been a fair amount of chat, I think, about enclosing the deck. You can enclose the deck one of two ways. One, what we're seeing in both of these pictures is a deck enclosure vertically. So around the perimeter of the deck, you enclose it. Something to notice in this left-hand picture is that there appears to be a lot of rock mulch under the deck. This is a good feature, good combustible zone. The lattice that we see in the left-hand picture seems to be mostly aesthetic because it's not stopping embers from getting underneath there. It's not really stopping debris from getting in, up under the deck, before that. So I think if we're going to enclose the deck, you need to keep in mind a couple of things. One is that you don't want to enclose the deck in such a way that water that passes through those deck board gaps can't get out, because you're going to end up with a moisture problem in that underdeck area, both in terms of rotting of the wooden members and corrosion of metal fasteners. So this lattice, would provide a lot of opportunity for airflow, but it doesn't really do much to protect the deck from debris and from embers. Makes it harder to clean out. That low to the ground deck also makes it harder to clean out just because it's so low to the ground. If you have this kind of scenario, then the right-hand strategy, I think, if you want to enclose a deck, is better. It's a metal mesh, like 1/8 of an inch metal mesh enclosure that minimizes the opportunity for debris to get blown under there, and it's definitely reduces the number and size of embers that can follow. So this is a better strategy because it takes care of the moisture part, allowing air to flow, and it keeps debris and ember entry to a minimum. So this is a better design feature, I think.
But be sure to make sure you've got a way to get into that underside area, because there's going to be ongoing maintenance issues Birds drop seeds. You've got things that fall through the deck, and then you can have, plants and vegetation get established under there. So it's not a system that doesn't require you to ever go back underneath that location. I find, the amount of light, if it's a deck's on the north side, you're going to have less light that gets underneath, and you'll have less vegetation to manage. But any of those southern exposures, you can have plants growing 6 to 8 feet, from the edge of the deck to the interior of the deck. So figuring out how you're going to control that vegetation growth is really important.
So what we haven't talked about is things on your deck. And when wildfire is threatening, we think it's really a good idea to bring your cushions from your patio furniture inside. We can see from this picture, this is from Angora fire, that embers land on cushions. Ignition did not occur here, but definitely could have occurred. This wicker furniture would be more vulnerable to ignition from embers than other kinds of even wood furniture that has larger members, for example. So this chair you could bring inside also. Doormats you want to bring inside. Brooms that you might lean against your house you want to bring inside. So you want to just make sure you get combustibles inside. The larger patio furniture that might be harder to move, you can move them away from the house, move it as far to the perimeter of the deck as you can. These things, they can be something that brings fire to the home itself, and fire, as a flaming fire. So,
and if you're down to just the last 10 minutes, you can also throw them off your deck and throw them a long way away from the house. Also, I want to remind people, a lot of people have propane tanks as a part of their portable barbecues that are stationed on the deck. So disconnect that propane tank and pull it away from your house as far as you can. Another good strategy.
So just to summarize what we've been talking about here, just remember that your near home non-combustible zone applies to under the footprint of your deck. So you want to make sure that's also a non-combustible zone. This action plus this developing and maintaining a good defensible space will minimize the chance that the flames can reach the underside of your deck and impinge on it or touch it. Once flames start touching the bottom side of your deck or your home, it's just much harder for most homes to get around that and resist it. Redwood deck boards in particular are much more vulnerable to ignition from embers in this gap between deck boards. So remember to remove debris that can accumulate in those between deck board gaps. Denser boards, some of the tropical hardwoods such as ipe, all of the plastic composites are less vulnerable because they are more dense. They're less vulnerable to embers. Some of the plastic composites can be more vulnerable to flames underneath, so you want to just make sure that you do what you can do to reduce that opportunity of an exposure for wood and for plastic composites. If you are doing some retrofitting, adding this metal flashing that we talked about to the tops of the joists can help reduce the vulnerability of your deck to embers. If you're building a brand new deck, some research has shown that use of non-combustible joists, such as metal joists, can also reduce the vulnerability of your deck, even if you have combustible deck boards. We talked about this strategy where you remove deck boards close to your home and replace them with a non-combustible option that can be a metal grate that just serves as something that allows water to drain through, or a metal deck board. This is much cheaper than replacing your entire deck, and in essence creates a non-combustible zone at your deck to home interface there, so it can help protect your home from igniting. And just remember, as we said, when wildfire is threatening, bring cushions and the smaller furniture inside. This includes and brooms and combustible doormats and the like. This will help also protect your home from embers and ignition that can occur.
Just remember, if your deck has one of those beautiful views and it's overhanging a slope, I really want to encourage people to prioritize action around their deck immediately, because fire burns uphill and will preheat and will help dry out that deck and will also, cast a lot of embers at the deck. So there's a particular vulnerability in that situation that deserves some very quick and speedy attention to it so that your home has the best chance of survival. So if you're in the game of new construction, you've got a lot of options and some new design details that can make a difference, and especially including that flashing on the top of wooden joists. Very cheap, simple solution that's quite elegant. And so, think about how you prioritize upgrading and maintaining your deck through time, because this is one of the key vulnerabilities in your home.